Mode of transport for centuries. And this place right here, the South Australian National Railway Museum, has one of the richest and largest collections of trains and train-related memorabilia. This is a true historical icon amongst some of South Australia's finest. Trains have been used as a form of transportation all across the globe. For centuries, they have been the predominant form of long-distance travel on land, used for travelling from town to town, city to city, state to state, and in some cases even country to country. Long-distance travel like this was impossible for many years in Australia, however.
Prior to Australia becoming a federation in 1901, each state had different length railway gauges. This was implemented in order to prevent military invasions, as troops would have to get off their train and board a separate train in order to reach the state's capital. This became an issue when the individual governments began trading goods with each other. This inevitably led to the Federation of States.
First of all, a railway gauge is the spacing of the tracks on which the actual train travels on. There are many varying sizes and shapes of gauges across the world, depending on types of train, geographical location, train, and many other factors.
There were three types of gauges.
The first one being the narrow gauge, which was 3'6", used in Western Australia and Queensland. Because of Australia's large landmass, they used the narrow gauge as it was cheap and effective. It was followed by the standard gauge, which was 4'8.5" and was only used in New South Wales.
And then we have the broad gauge, which was 5'3" and is in South Australia and Victoria.
Varying sizes of the railway gauges seemed like a brilliant idea during the pre-Federation days, making it a flawless form of protection from invading colonies, slowing down invading armies during a time where rail was a staple form of interstate transportation. If someone was to travel interstate during the time, they would have to change various stations and transit at various stops depending on where they were going, comparable to an aeroplane journey today. This is an example of a narrow gauge. Over there is an example of a standard gauge. And on the other side of that train is an example of a broad gauge. Right here. Here is how one of the biggest and most overlooked issues in Australian history affected the functionality of a whole country for many, many years. The issue made travelling between colonies during the pre-Federation days and travelling between states after the Federation a nightmare for both common folk and traders alike. The varying sizes and gauges was a colossal yet overlooked problem that stretched far beyond its initial welcome.
The cons of this system began showing when trading between colonies began. Transporting large quantities of goods became cumbersome. Eventually, when Federation took place in 1901, it became clear that the system was outdated. In 1863, English Army Major James Bevan Edwards highlighted the issue and how it would cause issues in the future. But his outcry was initially ignored. He was correct in the long run, however. Edwards also highlighted the flawed system of customs and immigration, where passengers would have to be searched for their goods and would often have them removed in some cases. Free trade between colonies only came to place during Federation. Edwards was originally commissioned to help improve Australia's defence and initially suggested for a mutual defence system between colonies for a better protection.
When did they implement standard gauges throughout all Australia?
Starting in 1956, they built a line from Albury down to Melbourne to standard gauge so that there would be no breaker gauge at Albury on the Sydney-Melbourne line. That was the first one.
And when did they finalise standard gauges throughout?
Standard gauge finalised was finished in 1995 when they changed the gauge from Adelaide to Melbourne.
Did having different size gauges have in World War I and II in Australia?
Political effect was that it brought the states closer together for transport.
As highlighted in the previous interview with John, the differences between the railway gauges had a severe political effect during World War I and II. As seen in these images, troops had to board multiple trains to get to the location where they would depart for battle. This added difficulty to export Australian troops to our allies in war.
Trains and their gauges have had a significant impact on Australia. Their impact has stretched far beyond just transportation, with the issues affecting the country economically, politically and socially. The many issues caused by the varying gauges continued for lots of years, even after the initial federation of the country. This documentary focused on the various problems caused by the different gauges. Thank you for watching Travelling on Rails.
She did it. Who did it? She did it.
Why when it started the Federation in 1901? Australia consisted of 5 railway gauges.